So events, I think, are a hot topic at the moment for everybody. Many of you have had some success moving events from physical to virtual in the last 2 years. But what does the future hold? Will we see a sustained bounce back into physical events? Do hybrid events really work? Where are virtual events succeeding and where do they fall short? I think what we've seen a sort of steady opening up over the last 3 months. A lot of members are still acting very cautiously and picking and choosing the times when they put themselves in the same space as other people. At one end of the spectrum, I'm attending a real world conference in London next week with 500 delegates, which is making me feel slightly giddy with excitement. And then at the other end, I was talking to some friends last night who've gone into sort of self-imposed lockdown for the next 2 weeks because they're unsure. They want to make sure that they're COVID-free in advance of a family holiday. So you've got all of these competing factors that we're dealing with at the moment, which makes planning events and planning the future of physical interactions or digital interactions with members something that we've got to think about quite carefully. So to help us do that, we're joined by one of our partner consultants, William Thomson from Gallus Events. William has worked with people in the events industry for almost 20 years, including the British Association, British Bankers Association, ICAEW, the Council of Mortgage Lenders, before starting his own events consultancy, running events for membership bodies, brands, and trade bodies. So, William, just to start off, tell us a little bit about the last 2 years and how you've seen the landscape of events changing.
Thanks for the introduction, John. Hello, everyone. The last two, if you jump back to 2 years ago, it looks very different from where we are now, and I'm really interested to hear how your organisations and how the events teams within your organisations have changed. But really, going even further back than 2 years ago, events hadn't changed that much for as long as I'd been in the association sector. You know, our conferences look very similar, our dinners, our exhibitions all look very similar. And I think as an industry, we were all very comfortable with things being very similar to what they've always been before. And there's an upside to that, of it being easy and not so stressful. Of course, events are always stressful though, but also there's when something very different happens, it's a struggle for us to change. And I think that's what happened to the events industry overall. I think we were very comfortable in doing things a very particular way, that when the pandemic hit, we really, really struggled. And that was reflected across different types of organisations. It wasn't just associations or brands or commercial companies who struggled with that restriction of business from physical and moving into a virtual world. It was every type of organisation, and also big organisations and small organisations. So I know you'll be aware of this, but the problems that you had were very similar. And that really was reflected in the types of clients I had over that first year, right from, you know, one of the biggest medical associations in North America, right through to a small energy company based in Iceland, clients in Australia and America. Everyone was really struggling to understand this world of virtual events. And, you know, now that we're through that restriction of business from physical, I think now is the time to take a step back and think, well, what have we learned from operating in a digital world? And how do we bring that to all of our events, not just any virtual events going forward, but our physical events going forward? So you know, there's a famous quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And I think a lot of associations did let a good crisis go to waste, because I think they were spending a lot of time just getting things back to where they were. And really, I don't think many organisations, and certainly some associations, have not been able to take a step back and say, well, how do we now look forward? How do we take advantage of what was a really difficult and troubling time to think about our engagement overall with our members? And that's really what I'd love to find out from the people who are joining us today, and also to give my thoughts and some advice on how we make the most of that. But it's not as different an environment as I think it should be, because I think a lot of organisations have tried to go back to what it was pre-2020, when I think there was a lot of issues with how events were run.
And what mistakes do you think people made initially when trying to sort of pivot from physical to face-to-face to virtual?
Yeah, well, I mean, mistakes is is actually quite a harsh word, because no one made any mistakes because it was so new. Everyone was just trying. What we were able to do, and where our clients had success, was we were able to say to them, don't try and replicate your physical event in a virtual world. Let's start to take advantage of what you're able to do virtually and how you use digital content to make much more of your supply of your services to members. And the events that were failing were the exhibitions who had 50 exhibition stands and nothing else going on. You really had to take back and look at an event and say, what is it people want out of this interaction, and start designing your events from that. And that's what we were able to do with most of our clients, was to say, okay, what do you want to deliver? Rather than saying, how do you deliver X event? What is it that you're trying to get out of it? So initially, those first 3 to 6 months were very much, oh my God, we've got an event in 3 weeks' time, which we can't hold. Can you help us? And then that was just about, to a greater degree, replicating the event. But anything longer term, moving into 6 weeks away or 3 months away, we were able to say to our clients, well, let's make the most of this. And here's the approach that we've developed to be able to do this. So yeah, as I said, mistakes is a bit hard, a bit of a horror, because it was so difficult. And I think a lot of people now are realizing that if they spent a little bit more time understanding how to make the most of virtual, they would probably be in a better position now. I think if I was to use that word again, John, of mistake, I think the mistake that a lot of people made is thinking this is just for the short term. Let's not spend too much time and resource on this, and we'll get back to physical soon. And I think the organizations that do that might have seen a little bump, but over a longer period, 3 to 5 years, I think will really struggle if they don't fully take advantage of the opportunities of a virtual and a digital world.
Do you think that everything's just going to switch back to what it was in 2019, or do you think hybrid or virtual? What kind of long-term future do you think they have from what you've been seeing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and my worry is that we go back to what our events were like. The majority of our events were like pre-2020. And I'm not judging anyone here's events because I don't know enough about them. But in general, I think that we need to go back to a situation where we're looking at events very differently before the pandemic, or physical events. I don't think we should be going back to, shell scheme exhibition-led exhibitions. I don't think we should be having 25 meetings for our attendees with suppliers. I don't think we should be cramming conference programs with content. There's a lot of things that I think we should be doing differently. And I hope that living in a virtual world has allowed event organisers and people who are running associations to see that there's a way of doing business which is different. And this is taking much more advantage of the digital content that you're creating. But I would say now it looks like people are kind of finally understanding what people like myself, meeting designers like myself, have been talking about for 20 years. And, we really realized that when we were at virtual, that people's concentration span was so short, and that content had to be snappier and more engaging and more interactive, and it had to offer a lot of variety. And, as I said, meeting designers like myself have been saying this and trying to help clients for 10, 15 years to try and develop the physical events. And when we went virtual, it was much easier to have shorter sessions and a variety, and offer the right amount of choice, and offer different environments for people to spend their time in. And I hope, and I think the best events are taking that learning from meeting design, our experience in virtual events, and bringing that back to the physical world. So I would kind of, my first challenge for the audience is, after this, is just to think, how different is our next virtual event from what it would have been had we not had this transition to virtual. And if there's not 5 or 6 things that are different, then I would be saying to you, you're missing an opportunity to make your events better than where they were pre-pandemic. What a lot of people are experiencing from the virtual events is that people are turning up for their event, but not staying for very long. And, and that proves to me that the design of the event hasn't been done properly, because you've done the hard work. The hardest thing is to get someone to click a link and join your event. But I'm sure you've all had a similar experience that I've had over the last few months, is you'll maybe just join an event for 10, 15 minutes. But if you can't engage, if you can't interact, if there's nothing else happening, if the content's not strong enough, then you just go off and do something else. So what I help clients with is really make sure that their events are sticky and go through a whole process of helping them make sure that their events are sticky when they get when they've done the hard miles of getting someone to attend that event, that they stay for a longer period of time, or they then engage with the content at a later time, which is just equal in terms of the value that the attendee is getting. But yeah, that's definitely something you need to make the most of.
Pre-pandemic, we used to run evening lectures for our members, and they were very popular. The moment we launched them, we'd get about 100 people signing up, and people were really interested in attending these. So now that the pandemic's over, we decided to go back to this program of lectures and started promoting these to our members. So we're back to doing these evening events, but take up has been incredibly low. We've also had like a huge dropout rate on the day. There just doesn't seem to be as strong an appetite for this sort of event post-pandemic. And I was wondering, do you think, in terms of how membership organizations operate, which is where I'm based, do you think we have to how can we better anticipate members' appetites in terms of how they want their events to be delivered? And how can we get a better understanding of delivering an event that they want and will want to attend? Because it's kind of been a compulsion to go back to something that worked so well before the pandemic. And it's been a real shock to realize that it hasn't worked so well now.
Your members have saying to you, for that particular, and this is an important point, for that particular event or that particular type of content, we are happy for it to be delivered virtually. However, you can't take that across for all of your events, because you'll also have people saying, well, we want to actually connect with people, and we can't do that as well virtually. So I think you've got to be led by your members. I would certainly, if I was supporting you, Sarah, I would have said, okay, we need to test before we go back to physical that there is an appetite for this, and also it's worth saying that this might change in a year, and I think this is a situation that associations have struggled with. Most of my consultancy is in association, so I understand the particular pace that associations move, but this need for flexibility in delivery isn't something that sits particularly well with a lot of associations. So this really means you've got to analyze, your systems and your structure and your supervisory support and the skills within the team and your systems to make sure that you're able to have this much more of a flexibility. And Duncan mentioned it in terms of a hybrid approach. That's exactly that. You have to be in a situation where you can say, well, attendee numbers aren't up, so we can just flick this to virtual. And that's a seamless process, and there's not concerns and budgetary issues and cancellation problems. It's just a process that's in place where you're able to do that to make the most of it. But to directly answer your question, Sarah, you just need to ask the members. But my important point is that their views will probably change over a annoyingly relative short period of time.
So one of the questions that we've had in was from Catherine at the Institute of Physics and Engineering in Medicine. And she was asking if you've seen any really good examples of hybrid events, or what really works for hybrid events.
For me, I've just written an article for one of the big trade publications, and I've just said hybrid is only the answer if the question is, how do you get technology companies to make money? So I'm not a huge fan of that kind of traditional hybrid version that you would think about, because it can be really expensive. Hybrid for me is just a way of looking at an event and thinking about a physical and a virtual engagement. It doesn't have to be at the same time, and that's still a hybrid event for me. I know I've had not clients, because it's against my advice, but other organizations who have tried to blend this physical and this hybrid audience together. And that kind of makes sense, but it's exceptionally difficult to do and also expensive. So I mean, like someone who's, in Calgary is meeting with someone who's in London, and you're thinking, well, I can see why you're doing that, but if that's what you want for a hybrid, but really the person in London wants to meet with all the other people in London who are there. They can meet up with the person from Calgary at a later date. There's no need for that connection to take place. So I think hybrid at the moment, I think people are discovering that actually you don't need this huge element of engagement between these audiences that maybe people thought at the start with hybrid.
How do you create a hybrid event or just a virtual event with out spending huge amounts of money.
2005 was the first virtual event I ran, and that was actually a hybrid format. But I ran a hybrid event in London 2016, 2017, and we spent £3,000 on our technology to make it hybrid. And we got about 12 to 15,000 of revenue from our virtual audience for a £3,000 outlay. So it can be done. It's really easy. It's really easy to do to make your virtual element of your hybrid event make money. But you'll find a lot of people are charging 50, 60, 70, 80,000 for production on a virtual event that just doesn't need it. And no one comes to virtual events and expects it to be like a Netflix experience. And if you go to an event something like South by Southwest, well, yeah, you expect that to be like Netflix, but they've brought in £12.5 million in revenue. So you just have to kind of scale back and really understand the level of expectation. £3,000 we spent on our 2-day virtual event that made 5 times the revenue, and the interaction and the engagement and what people got out of it was perfect. So you can do this really expensive, and you can also do it really cheaply.
So William, can we really network in a way that offers great return on investment for attendees and sponsors in a virtual event setting? Has anybody done that successfully in your experience?
Facebook, Twitter, these organizations have done this incredibly well. And if you think about what virtual, I'm not meaning, if you think about what people want when they're connecting, this is what social media has been doing for 15 years. So it's not like no one's connecting other people well virtually. It's just that not many people have managed to do it well at their events. So there's a huge potential for us to create environments where people are able to connect. So that's when I'm looking at events, I'm thinking, well, it's been done by other industries, and social media is hugely influential and all pervasive, really. So there's definitely ways to do it, but how do we do it in our own context? And the first thing that I normally do with clients is to say to them, what do you mean by networking? Because networking is often, it's what people say, but actually networking is a form of connecting. And actually, when you look at an event, there's 3 pillars. There's the content, and there's the connections, and then there's the coverage.
What do you think the opportunities are within a sort of consumer context, where it might be a special interest group, or you're bringing a group of members together who are interested in a topic, and you want to create a sort of sense of community or a sort of a relationship with those people? What do you think it looks like within that space?
Yeah, that's a really good question, but you said 2 words there, community and relationship. And we all know that those things are not just transactional, and they're not just built overnight. And again, I think because we were kind of pushed to this virtual world without a really long runway, we're kind of expecting a lot. I would say to people, excuse me, I would challenge organizers and say, if you want this level of engagement, as I said, you have to do something about it. You're expecting people to feel part of a community. What have you done to do that? You're expecting people to have a strong relationship with the other people. Well, how have you done that? It takes time. And I think one thing event organizers don't tend to have much of is time. And I'm sure all associations are different, but there's still in general an approach that let's get the event, let's get the numbers, let's get the revenue, let's get the coverage, and we'll move on to the next one. And I think that's something that a lot of organizations have to change. And I often say to clients, they've got to start thinking about their events as a service rather than a product. And you don't put services down a production line. And you've got to take your events off a production line, and you've got to support your members of staff to start doing events differently. And that leads into longer term relationships and communities. So I hope you wouldn't be surprised by me saying there's no easy fix to that, but that is the case. We have to put our effort in, and I do think that a lot of people still look at their events as too transactional, and we need X and Y from this, and this is how we measure it, rather than a slightly longer term.
What do you think the future holds for the next 6 months? All people are starting back to physical events and getting things up and running again. What do you think are the main challenges or the main things they should be aware of?
Well, there's definitely going to be a bounce back to physical, and we're probably all seeing it in our personal life and our professional lives. I think after I think towards the end of this year, when we're getting to the colder months, I think there'll be a jump back to virtual for a few reasons. And just last week, someone took a picture, posted it on Twitter, and it said, "Great to be back at this event." And this event was in a cold, dark, damp lecture theatre with a boring presenter and bullet points on screen. And I thought, you probably are excited about that right now, but I bet you when you get home and realise that you could have watched all the content virtually, you won't be as excited. And I really do feel like there'll be a bounce to physical and then a bounce to virtual, not for every event, but in general, I think people will be realising, I think it was Duncan who said earlier that people will be, you know what, I haven't had to travel to that event, you know, and I've got the value from it, and I attended a cheaper fee, and I was able to meet, or, you know, so definitely that's where we're going to go. I think the big challenge is keeping things just ticking over for associations over the next few months. And I hope that associations do that and just have it ticking over so they can find some time and resource to step back and think, how do we start to look towards a future where digital is a much bigger part of the learning and the events and the training that we give to our members. So I hope that's what's going to happen over the kind of next period of the next kind of 6 months, that there's a little bit of keeping things going, but really finding the time to look ahead. So it's a really, really important point. And for me, as I said, that's the reason that I've been so powerfully supporting virtual, is because of the real positive impact it can have on sustainability.
How can we as event professionals address the lack of diversity in the events industry?
It shouldn't be as much of a challenge now as it was, because we should be able to bring in people who are outside of our own smaller networks or even our own geographical areas, with the use of virtual. It's not an area I feel particularly comfortable speaking on because I'm a white middle-aged man, but I know it's incredibly important, and I hope that virtual really helps us do that. When I wrote an article about 6 or 7 years ago on the kind of manels, you know, and there being no excuse for not having women on your event, and I posted that blog again just a few months ago, and it had a few thousand hits, and it was just a very practical approach to say, if you're concerned about this, there really isn't any excuse if you have enough time, and here's other things that you can do. But I said, on my other side of my business, we have 98% of our audience is female, and there's a huge issue finding speakers even in that market because of imposter syndrome. And it's something that more women suffer from than men. Men are just more likely to say, yep, I can do that. And women, unfortunately, are more likely to say, oh, no, that's not really my thing. I think there's someone better to do it. And of course, that is absolutely not the case. But it is hard in terms of gender, but really important. And hopefully virtual allows us to do that a little bit better.